Plan leaders, October through December is the last quarter of the year. And you know what that means with gap closure, right? This is the window that makes or breaks your star performance and HEDIS results. And the truth is, you don't have the luxury of time. Every gap you close now does not only lock in performance for the year, but it will also set you up for the next year. So if you're watching this video, you already know Q4 is crunch time. But here's the good news. If you prioritize smartly, you can still move the needle in a meaningful way. But before we dive into strategies, I want to clarify something important. This video is different from my earlier Q4 strategy content on retro season readiness, where we focused on exclusions, data governance, preparing for successful chart chase season, chase list strategies. This is different from that. If you haven't seen that video yet, I recommend you check it out after this one, and I'm going to link it at the end. Let's dive in. Today's discussion is specifically about gap closure efforts in Q4. And this is about HEDIS and STARS measures you can still move between October and December. What to focus on, what to stop doing, and how to do it in a way that would maximize impact with limited time or maybe limited resources. In Q4, leaders need discipline in where to focus because you don't have unlimited time. So you have to zero in on measures that are heavily weighted for stars or HEDIS measures that can easily move the needle. You need to also zero in on measures that are clinically meaningful, and finally, measures that are still actionable in the last 90 days of the year. And I don't want to overwhelm you by bombarding you with tons of strategies on, a lot of measures. So I'm going to provide strategies on a couple of high impact measures that you can still implement if you haven't already. Let's go measure by measure with practical tactics. Starting is GSD, which is glycemic status assessment in patients with diabetes. This measure is a high stakes digital first measure. GSD looks at the most recent HbA1c or glycemic status reading in the year, whether it's compliant. For it to be compliant, it needs to be less than 9%. And here's the challenge in Q4. A member may have been compliant all year with good readings, but then during the holidays, their diet changes. The stress, holiday festivities, reduced activities, and the last HbA1c test comes back elevated. That single elevated reading can wipe out a year of compliance and count against your performance. Here are some strategies you can implement in Q4 for GSD. Many apparent gaps are actually data feed issues. So if lab feeds are delayed or are not pouring in appropriately, you can pull a completed HbA1c list directly from your lab sources or from your data teams, and then extract it into an Excel file and assign a team of staff to scrub the data and enter the values into your system. You will often find members with compliance readings that were not captured. Also target low-hanging fruits, and these are members who have historically been compliant or engaged with care. If their lab result shows a non-compliant, they are prime candidates for outreach. These members are usually willing to schedule a follow-up visit with their PCP. So one compliant test before the year end can return them to the numerator. Another strategy you can implement is execute member outreach in Q4. And your team need to be very delicate. Members oftentimes already know that their sugar is high. So they don't need a stranger reminding them in a judgmental tone that their reading is elevated. In my experience, members are very sensitive to plan reps discussing elevated HbA1c results, especially when the rep is not their doctor. It feels very intrusive, and I think it's something we can all empathize with. So the best practice here is to assign these outreach calls to the case managers who already have relationship with the member. If the plan staff must call, train them to be supportive, to be non-judgmental, and also to be very respectful. An example of a language you can leverage is, we noticed you may be due for another HbA1c test. Would you like us to help you connect with your provider to schedule it? The goal here is not to point out your sugar is high, but is to enable access to a follow-up test or follow-up care. The fourth strategy you can implement is encourage members to schedule their lab or PCP visits before the holiday hits in full swing mode, which is usually between mid-November through December. After December, testing volumes drop and access issues increases. So you want to get appointments scheduled now, not mid-December or mid-November. GSD in Q4 is a balancing act. Clean up the data, target members who are historically compliant but temporarily non-compliant, and engage with empathy. This is not about HbA1c values. It's about how your plan treats members at their most vulnerable. The tone of the outreach can make the difference between the gap closure and the negative CAPS response. Let's look at CBP, which is controlling high blood pressure. CBP is a hybrid measure, meaning performance is assessed using both administrative data and medical record review. It looks at whether the most recent blood pressure reading of the member in the measurement year is less than 140/90. Because it's the most recent reading, a compliance reading earlier in the year can be overwritten by a later elevated reading, which is a major risk in Q4, just like the GSD measure we just talked about. One uncontrolled reading in November or December can flip a member's compliance to become non-compliant. Here are some Q4 challenges for CBP. Some readings never make it into the system if the providers fail to code appropriately or even submit encounters properly. Members with reading just above the threshold is also another challenge. A member could be 142/92, and these members are often overlooked, but they can be turned around with one additional compliance reading. Another challenge is a non-compliance reading in December can easily replace a compliance reading throughout the whole year. Another challenge is getting members back in for a BP check during the holidays. This is hard due to the reduced office hours and member availability. They may be traveling, visiting family during the holiday festivities. So you want to be cognizant of that. Here are some Q4 strategies to implement for CBP. Identify and prioritize near misses members. You can run a list of members with most recent readings slightly above the 140/90. These are your low-hanging fruits. A one follow-up visit or a repeat reading can flip them to be compliant. Focus outreach here first. Another strategy you can implement is expand access to readings. Partner with retail pharmacies, mobile clinics, and urgent care facilities that can record BP values and allow home BP monitoring uploads where NCQA rules permits it. For instance, remote patient monitoring devices with proper provider verification can be utilized. Encourage providers to recheck BP readings during the year-end visits. Often, this is the second reading in the same visit and is mostly within the range. A third strategy you can implement is engage providers. Send gap lists with 10 to 15 highest priority members per provider, not a long spreadsheet. Respect time of the providers. Remind providers that a single documented compliance BP reading can bring the member into compliance numerator, and push for correct coding. This will be your CPT2 3074Fs and your 3078Fs. So compliance readings can easily flow into your administrative data. A fourth strategy is member outreach with sensitivity, similar to GSD. Encourage members with elevated readings to schedule a BP reading checks before the holidays. Avoid over-testing unnecessarily. If a member is stable and compliant, avoid pushing them into situations that could generate an out-of-range override. So CBP is one of the most sensitive hybrid measures because performance hinges on the last recorded reading. Q4 success will depend on data capture, prioritizing near misses, expanding access points and preventing unnecessary overrides. And as a leader, you should see CBP as both a clinical measure and a member experience measure, because how you engage members around their blood pressure directly affects CAP's questions on access, communication, and coordination. I also want to talk about utilizing provider incentives. By October to December, providers are often fatigued from a year of gap closure requests. So one way to re-engage them is to provide them with financial impact to closing gaps. If you have a pay-for-performance contract, translate member gaps into dollars at stake. An example, Dr. Smith, if you can close these 15 CBP and adherence gaps, that could actually increase your incentives payout by X amount of dollars this quarter. You need to make it concrete, not abstract. Providers are more motivated when they can see how Q4 work ties directly to their year-end bonuses. Some plans even run Q4 context or accelerators, extra payouts or recognition for top performing provider groups on STARS, HEDIS, gap closure. You need to leverage field staff and case managers. Your field staff and case managers, as well as community health workers, are key in Q4. When they call or visit members, they can collect member-reported readings, and these can count under NCQA rules when handled correctly. For CBP, a member-reported BP reading can be accepted if taken with a validated home blood pressure cuff, reported directly to a provider or the health plan staff, and documented with a date and the value in a supplemental data system. So the field staff should be trained to ask, do you have a recent BP reading from your home monitor, and can you share the date and the number? So document both the systolic and the diastolic, and also confirm that the cuff is an FDA approved device if possible. These reported values, when logged properly, can be accepted as a supplemental data during NCQA PSV audits. For GSD, some members have an at-home A1C meters like the finger stick devices. And so member reported values can be counted if the meter is FDA cleared, if the reading is documented with the date, the value, and the device type, and the result is captured by a provider or a health plan staff in the supplemental data system. Case managers can also encourage members with diabetes to obtain and use a home A1C meter, especially if access to labs is limited. Remind them that these conversations are sensitive. Members don't need to be told their sugar is high or their BP is uncontrolled. They usually already know this. So train the staff to be supportive and intentional. Plans can subsidize or distribute devices as part of care management programs, which is an investment that pays back in STARS performance.